My new girlfriend banned me from visiting the apartment she rented. She said I knew nothing about business and would only waste her time. She didn't know I had bought the whole building and had camera access. On Valentine's Day, when she saw the apartment keys in my hand, her hands began to shake. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments what city you're watching us from. She was beautiful that night. I need to be honest about that, because it'd be too easy to tell this story pretending I didn't love this woman. I loved the wine-colored dress, her hair tied back, the perfume she wore since we met, the one she said was imported, but I saw the box in her bathroom once, and it was domestic. Not even in that was she who she pretended to be. The restaurant was full. Valentine's Day in Goiânia. It's like that. Every good place gets packed. The traffic on T63 turns into a nightmare, and everyone shows up dressed up like it's a wedding. She'd chosen the place 2 months in advance. She sent me the link with a message. I already booked it, babe. It'll be special. I replied with a heart. I kept the info. I used it later. We sat down at 8:30. She ordered the wine without looking at the price. I let her. She gave a beautiful speech about our future, about how much she believed in me, about the plan she had for us both. I listened to it all without interrupting once. I'm like that. I learned early that whoever talks too much is hiding something, and whoever listens closely is gathering pieces. When she finished, I put the envelope on the table. She looked with that smile of someone who thinks they know what's coming. She reached out slowly, like someone who doesn't want to seem anxious, but is anxious. She opened it, read the first line of the first document. The smile started leaving her face in a way I never forgot. Not all at once, not with drama, but little by little, like when the tide goes down and you start seeing what was hidden under the water. While I put the keychain on the table, her hands started trembling. I'll tell you what was inside that envelope, but before that, I need to tell you who I really am. Because this story doesn't start at that dinner. It starts much earlier, in a sales stand under the Goiânia sun, where a woman tried to sell me an apartment without knowing I knew the price per square meter of that land better than the developer himself who'd built the building. My name is Murilo Rezende, 41 years old. I was born in Annapolis, the son of a small contractor who woke up at 5 in the morning and came home with lime on his hands and sand in his hair. I grew up seeing my dad sign contracts on the hood of his truck because he didn't have a desk. I saw him lose projects because of words that didn't turn into paper. I learned early that in the construction world, you either have documents or you have nothing. I learned to read a floor plan before I learned to drive. At 18, I went to Goiânia to work on a construction site. I started as a laborer, carrying cement bags and plumbing formwork. I moved up over time, apprentice, journeyman, foreman. I studied civil engineering at night for 7 years. After graduating, I worked 4 more years for others. I saved what I could to open my company. Today, I've got 3 active developments in the Bueno sector and a commercial building in the Marista area. I don't appear in magazines. I don't post construction photos on Instagram. I don't wear designer clothes or expensive watches. I drive a Hilux without company stickers because I learned that in Goiânia, whoever advertises what they have usually has less than they advertise. Real money doesn't make noise. It never did. Tatiana didn't know any of this when she met me, and I, for a while, thought that was some kind of blessing. I thought it was good to be seen without the weight of what I'd built, without that layer that wealth puts between you and people. It took me a while to understand it wasn't romance, it was blindness. She didn't know what I had because she never asked. And she didn't ask because she was too busy calculating what she could take from me based on what she saw on the outside. The simple sneakers, the quiet demeanor, the hands that never got completely clean from so much work. We met on an April afternoon. There's a real estate launch in the Marista area by a developer I knew by name. I knew the owner had bought the land poorly, paid too much for the location, and that he'd have trouble getting the project approved by City Hall. I went to the stand out of curiosity. I wanted to see what they'd done with that space, how they'd resolved the floor plan. I walked in with a dress shirt, no tie, simple pants, leather sneakers, the way I always go to these things. She came towards me with a tablet in hand and the smile of someone who just saw an opportunity walk through the door. She presented the development to me with a confidence that caught my attention. She knew the numbers, she knew the pitch, She knew how to pause at the right time and smile when the client hesitated. I started asking questions about the foundation, about the contract adjustment index, about the occupancy permit situation. At some point, she realized I knew more about that launch than expected, and I saw a spark of confusion in her eyes that she hid quickly. She didn't ask where so much knowledge came from. She adjusted her smile and continued the script. I didn't buy the apartment. I knew that deal was going to be delayed, but I left with her number. That day, I thought I'd found a smart and beautiful woman who understood the market where I lived. I only found out later that she'd thought the exact same thing, that she'd found a client who knew what he wanted and who could pay well. The difference is that I made a mistake out of affection. She made a mistake out of calculation, and a wrong calculation in construction brings down the structure. She was going to learn that the hard way. In the first months, we got to know each other slowly. She was smart, fun, had an opinion on everything. She talked about the real estate market with the fluency of someone who lived inside it since she was young, and she really had since she was 23, when she'd started as an administrative assistant in a real estate agency in the West Sector. I liked hearing her speak. I liked the way she gestured when she defended a point. I liked the crooked smile that appeared when she thought she'd convince me of something. She never convinced me of anything I didn't want to be convinced of, but during that time I really wanted to. About 6 months after we started dating, she told me she'd rented a commercial flat in the Marista area. She said she was growing in her career, that she needed her own space to see higher-level clients. I thought it was great. I asked for the address, more out of a developer's habit than anything else. Mental record of the area's square meter value, of which corridor in that part of the city was heating up. She said the address. I heard the address, and something very quiet inside me recognized that number immediately. I didn't say anything yet. I kept watching her talk enthusiastically about the flat, about the clients she was going to close, about the future she was building for herself. And while she spoke with all that sparkle in her eyes, I was thinking about something completely different. I was thinking that building was for sale and that the owner had already called me 2 weeks prior, asking if I was interested. I never told Tatiana what I did before we went out the first time. She thought it was spontaneous, that I acted on impulse, that coffee the day after the launch was the move of an interested man acting fast. Wasn't it? Before calling, I searched her name, saw her professional profile, the real estate ad she posted, the photos she chose to show online. Not out of suspicion, out of habit. I research everything before jumping in. Land, region, history, neighborhood. People aren't different from investments. You look at what shows on the outside, try to understand what's underneath. What I saw was a woman who really worked, who'd built a client portfolio by herself, who didn't depend on anyone to pay the bills. That interested me. I was never one to be impressed by looks. I'm impressed by a trajectory. I called on Tuesday. We had coffee on Wednesday. She arrived 10 minutes early, well-dressed, with that posture of someone who's used to being evaluated all the time. She sat down, ordered coffee with milk, looked at me with an attention that seemed genuine. We talked for 2 hours about Goiânia, about the market, about the places we'd lived before getting where we were. She was from a family that had had money and lost it. Her dad had a business in the Jardim Goiás sector. It went bankrupt when she was 16, and she grew up seeing the big house shrink to a small apartment, the designer clothes disappearing, the friends pulling away with the cruel naturalness that only teenagers have. She told this without drama, like someone who already digested it, but I heard something underneath that she wasn't saying out loud. A very old desire to go back to where she came from. I didn't think it was wrong. Everyone has a wound that turns into an engine. Mine was the cement bag my dad carried. Hers was the house in Jardim Goiás that vanished. I thought we had more in common than it seemed. What I didn't see at that moment, and only understood months later, is that there's a huge difference between wanting to rebuild what was lost and wanting to find someone who already built it to borrow it. I was looking at her trajectory and seeing determination. She was looking at me and doing math. We kept seeing each other. She was good company, I must say. She knew how to converse, knew how to listen when she wanted to, knew how to show up at the right time. At the beginning of the relationship, she'd call me when I was on site, ask how my day was, send a text early in the morning without me asking. For a man who spent years living alone, focused on work that carries weight. I lower my guard slowly, the way I do, without realizing, without wanting to, until one day I looked back and saw I was already in. I took her to meet my mom in Annapolis on a Sunday in July. Rice with peaky, free-range chicken, the simple house my mom never wanted to trade for a bigger one, even after I offered. Tatiana was friendly, praised the food, helped clear the table. My mom came to me later on the porch while Tatiana was inside and said quietly, "She's pretty, Murillo, but too pretty to stay quiet." I laughed. I said my mom suspected everyone. She didn't answer. She kept looking at me with that calm of someone who knows her son will need to remember this conversation one day. My mom always knew things before me. It's the kind of intelligence life gives to those who worked hard and were truly tricked at least once. About 8 months into dating, Tatiana started talking more about her business, about clients she was prospecting, about partnerships she was setting up, about how hot the Goiânia market was for those who knew how to position themselves. I listened with interest. Sometimes I gave an opinion when she asked. Other times she didn't ask, she just talked. And I noticed that in those moments she didn't want an interlocutor, she wanted an audience. It was around that time she rented the flat. She told me on a Friday night excited, like it was a conquest. She described the space, the floor, the view, the kind of client she was going to host there. She mentioned the address, and I registered everything internally without showing anything on the outside. I asked if I could drop by one of these days just to see it. Her answer was too fast. "Oh, Murillo, it's a work environment there. High-end clients, they don't like seeing a husband showing up in the middle of it. It disrupts the negotiation. It makes things awkward. You understand?" I said I understood, but I kept looking at her for about 2 seconds longer than necessary. She didn't notice. She grabbed her phone and started answering a text. A month passed. I suggested dropping by the flat to pick her up at the end of a day. She had a dinner scheduled with a client. They were going straight from there. "No need, babe. We'll meet at the restaurant." "All right." 3 more weeks passed. I said I was in the area and could come up quickly, have some water. "Today's too rushed here. Leave it for another day." Another day that never came. The 5th time she refused, I stopped suggesting it. I didn't fight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make that jealous man scene she maybe expected or maybe needed me to make to have an argument to use back. I stayed quiet, smiled, changed the subject, but something had changed inside me. It wasn't jealousy yet. It was that feeling I know well from construction. When you knock on the wall with your knuckle, and the sound that comes from inside isn't the sound that should come. It might be nothing. It might be the start of a structural problem that will open up down the road. You don't ignore that sound. You investigate. And I started investigating. The first thing I did was what any developer does when they want to understand a property. I went after the building's history, the owner's name, the registry status, if there was any recent movement at the notary's office. It took me 2 days to find out. The building was being put up for sale quietly, without a sign, without public ads. The owner was a man named Jalma, who I'd crossed paths with once in a negotiation years ago. An honest man who wanted to unload the property to solve an inheritance issue between his kids. I sat with that information for a while. I called Jalma on Monday morning. He answered on the 2nd ring. We talked for 40 minutes. At the end of the call, I said I was interested and asked for total discretion in the process. He said I could count on him. At that moment, I still didn't know what I was going to find when I got access to the building. I just knew something wasn't adding up, and I wasn't going to stay outside a door while the answer was inside. The purchase was made through my construction company's tax ID, without any fuss, without a new lawyer, without any movement that would draw the attention of anyone who didn't need to know. Dr. Enrique, who handles the legal side of my developments for 12 years, looked at me over his glasses when I explained the situation and just said, "Understood, I'll handle this as a priority." He didn't ask anything else. In 12 years of working together, he learned that when I say little about the reason for a decision, it's because the reason is too big to fit in a quick explanation. The process took 38 days. 38 days where I kept going to Sunday barbecues, answering good morning texts, watching shows next to her on the couch, as if the world was exactly what it seemed. She didn't notice anything different about me, And that over time became a piece of information too, because it means she wasn't really looking at me either. She was looking at the version of me she decided I was. And that version was too convenient to be questioned. On the 38th day, the notary registered the property. The building in Marista was in my company's name. I was on site when Dr. Enrique sent me the message confirming it. I put the phone in my pocket, grabbed the clipboard, and went to check the level of a beam with the foreman, as if nothing had happened. Only at night, alone in the office, I sat down and stayed quiet for a few minutes. It wasn't celebratory, it wasn't anxiety, it was that weird sobriety that comes when you cross a line of no return. Early the next day, I called the building manager, a guy named Littleton, who'd worked there for 4 years, and introduced myself as the new owner. I arranged to drop by in person the following week for an inspection visit, which is common practice when acquiring a commercial property. On that visit, I asked for access to the internal CCTV system, standard stuff, security documentation, property monitoring, the owner's responsibility for what happens on the property. Littleton didn't find it weird at all. He gave me the login and password with the naturalness of someone who's just following protocol. I thanked him. I folded the paper, put it in my suit pocket, and went back to the car. That night, I sat in front of the office computer with a cup of coffee that got cold without me drinking it. I logged into the system. The screen opened with the camera grid, reception, 2 hallways, service area, underground parking, fixed cameras, stable image, good angle. The kind of installation that was done with care, not just the bare minimum. I went straight to the 3rd floor hallway, flat 308. The room she'd been renting for 4 months. The hallway camera clearly caught the flat's front door. It didn't catch the inside, obviously. A hallway camera doesn't reach inside the rooms, and it wouldn't be right if it did, but it caught who entered, who left, at what time, with whom. I kept watching the footage from the day before. Tatiana had arrived at 10:22 in the morning alone. She walked in with her purse on her shoulder and the briefcase she always carried. She left at 12:43, also alone, probably for lunch. She came back at 2:08. At 3:18 in the afternoon, a man came down the hallway. I leaned forward in my chair. He was a man in his 60s, well-dressed, dark suit, well-kept white hair. He carried a genuine leather executive briefcase, the kind you don't buy in a cheap mall. He knocked on door 308. The door opened too fast to be a coincidence. She was waiting. He went in, the door closed. At 5:47 in the afternoon, he left. She came out right behind him with her briefcase under her arm and her phone in her hand. They went to the elevator together. I didn't have a camera in the elevator, but I had one at the ground floor reception. They came down together, talked for about 3 minutes in the lobby, and left opposite ways. He through the main exit. She through the side that led to the parking lot. That night, she called me at 7:30, saying it had been a long day, that she was tired, that she was going to eat dinner at home and sleep early. So I said, "Rest, babe. You work too much." She laughed and said that was right, that it was for a good future for us both. I said I understood. I hung up the phone and went back to the computer screen. I wanted to rewind the footage. 3 weeks ago, the same man, same briefcase, same suit, similar time. 2 weeks ago again. 1 week ago again. Always the same pattern. She'd arrive in the morning, he'd show up in the early afternoon. They'd stay for hours, leave separately. No camera gave me what happened inside that room. But frequency has meaning. Regularity has meaning. And what those images showed was a meeting happening every week in the same place with the same man she'd never mentioned to me a single time. I could have done what many men would do in that situation. I could have called her at that moment. I could have gone to the flat the next day. I could have confronted her, but I'm a contractor's son, and a contractor doesn't knock down a wall without knowing what's inside it. First, you investigate, you understand the structure. You only act when you've the complete diagnosis, because acting before that is a waste of energy and a risk of error. So I kept looking. In the footage of the following days, I started noticing details that I'd passed over quickly before. The man always arrived with documents in his briefcase, always left with less than he brought in, as if he left things in there. In one of the recordings, the flat's door stayed cracked open for a few seconds when he went in, and I paused the image, zoomed in as much as the zoom allowed, and saw on her work desk a stack of papers with a logo in the top corner. The camera resolution wasn't perfect, but I know that logo by heart. I chose the colors myself, the font, the design. I spent 3 weeks arguing with the designer until I got what I wanted. It was my construction company's logo. I closed the computer slowly, walked to the office window. Down there, Goiânia kept going. The night traffic, the building lights, the city that never completely stops. I stood there for an amount of time. I can't tell you how long. It wasn't anger yet. It was that cold clarity that appears when a suspicion you didn't want confirmed gets confirmed. When a sound you heard in the wall, finally, tells you what's rotting inside. She was using my company's name, the logo, the reputation, everything I'd built brick by brick since I was 18. She was using that in that flat with that man. On the afternoons, she told me she was working for our future. I went back to the desk, opened the computer again, and this time I didn't go to the cameras. I went to my contact for Dr. Enrique and sent a short text. Enrique, I need you to dig up a man's name for me. I'll send you the image. I need to know who he is, what he does, and if he has any connection to real estate business. I sent the camera screenshot. He replied in less than 2 minutes. I'll tell you tomorrow morning. I closed the computer, turned off the office light, and left. On the way home, I drove past a gas station and stopped to fill up. The attendant chatted, asked about the weather, said Goiânia was suffocating that month. I agreed, paid, got in the car, drove in silence home. I ate what was in the fridge, standing in front of the sink, without even turning on the TV. I went to sleep early, and the next day, at 7:43 in the morning, Dr. Enrique called me with a man's name. The name was Adalberto Quezada Nunes, 62 years old. Born in Rio Verde, a strong agribusiness area in southwest Goiás. The kind of city where a rich man doesn't show up in the newspaper, he shows up in the public registry. Owner of a soy and corn farm, minority partner in an agricultural supplies cooperative, and in the last 3 years, according to Dr. Enrique, he'd been shifting part of his wealth to urban real estate investments. He wanted to diversify, wanted to leave the dependence on the fields, the weather, the harvest, wanted to put money in something that'd stay standing regardless of rain. Enrique gave me all this over the phone, with the calm of someone who read a forensic report and is relaying the result. At the end, he paused a second and said, Murillo, his name pops up in 2 interesting searches. Do you want me to continue? I said I did. He continued. Adalberto Quezada Nunes's name appeared linked to a corporate tax ID inquiry made 3 months ago. The company he inquired about was my construction company. That wasn't unusual. Anyone can look up a registered company's tax ID. It's public info. But that wasn't all. Enrique had a contact and notary office in the central sector who, with the proper discretion, confirmed that a private investment promise agreement had been drafted during that same period. The parties were Adalberto Quezada Nunes as the investor, and on the other side, as the representative of a development tied to my construction company, Tatiana Vass's name. I stayed silent for about 5 seconds. Enrique waited. Does she have power of attorney for the company? I asked, already knowing the answer. None. I checked the power of attorney book. Her name doesn't appear on any document issued by the construction company in the last 5 years. I hung up the phone. I sat in the office chair with my hands still on the desk, looking at the wall ahead. Outside, the Goiânia morning was already warming up. You could hear the street movement. A delivery truck maneuvering, the muffled sound of a jackhammer 2 blocks away, the city working. I've always liked that sound. It reminded me that things are being built, that the world doesn't stop, that there's always something being raised somewhere. That morning, the sound felt different to me. It felt like something was being demolished. I took the car and went to the Board of Trade. I didn't send an assistant. I didn't ask Enrique to go. I went myself like I do when I need to see the document with my own eyes. Some things you can't receive in PDF. You need to hold it on paper, read line by line, feel the weight of what's written. The private agreement was there. 2 pages, small font, the technical language of someone who copied a template from the internet and filled in the blanks without fully understanding what they were writing. But the content was clear enough. Tatiana Vass presenting herself as a commercial rep for a high-end residential development to be launched in the sector in partnership with my construction company. Full name, tax ID. all there. It secured from Adalberto Quezada Nunez the amount of $76,000 as an initial investment, promising a 22% return on the invested amount within 18 months, $76,000. In the name of a company that authorized nothing, in the name of a development that didn't exist, in the name of a man who was never consulted. I folded the pages, put them in my suit's inner pocket, and left the board of trade, walking slowly, as if I was leaving a regular meeting. I didn't run. I didn't answer the phone that vibrated twice on the way to the car. I got in, closed the door, turned on the AC, and stayed parked in the lot for about 15 minutes without moving. I did the math, not the money math, the time math. Tatiana and I had been together for almost 2 years. The flat had been rented 4 months ago. The agreement with Adalberto had been drafted 3 months ago. That meant she'd waited for the relationship to solidify. She'd built a routine of trust between us, set the ground, and only then rented the flat and started running the scheme. It wasn't an impulse. It wasn't last-minute opportunism. It was planning. That weighed heavier than the document itself. I can deal with a mistake. I can deal with human weakness, with someone who acts badly in a bad moment, with a wrong decision made under pressure. Those are things I understand because I've messed up too, because I've made bad choices when I was tired or scared. What I can't accept, what doesn't pass through me without leaving a mark, is the coldness, the deliberate construction. The person who wakes up every day, kisses their partner's forehead, asks how they slept, and goes to work on the project of using that same partner as a tool. I can't call that a weakness. That has another name. I started the car, went to the construction site in the Bueno sector. The development she'd used on paper, the name she'd sold to a man from Rio Verde, as if it were hers. I stopped outside, looked at the structure going up, the scaffolding, the safety tarp, the workers on the 5th floor, years of work, land decisions, architectural design, city hall approvals, financing, site management, deadlines, costs, reputation. All that summarized in a tax ID she'd put on a piece of paper without calling me once. I called Enrique back. "Doctor, I need to know if Adalberto has already tried taking action against the company in any way. A notice, legal inquiry, anything." He said he'd check and get back to me by the end of the day. He called back at 5 p.m. with the info that, until that moment, nothing had been filed. Adalberto, apparently, was still waiting for the time frame to run its course. The agreement stated the start of construction in 6 months. 3 were still left. That gave me time. Not a lot, but enough. That night, Tatiana texted me asking if I wanted to have dinner together. She was craving chicken and brown sauce. She asked if I was down to go to a place she knew in the Pedro Ludovico sector. I said I was down. We had dinner. She was excited. She talked about a sale she'd closed during the day, complained about the traffic on Anhangara, ordered dessert. I ate, listened, replied at the right time. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. When we left the restaurant and she held my hand in the parking lot, I let her hold it. I went home thinking there's a skill no one teaches you, and that you only develop by living. The skill of remaining present on the outside, while on the inside you're somewhere else entirely. I'd learned that in construction. When cement is drying in the wrong place, you don't stop everything and yell. You keep the crew working. You solve the problem calmly. You act at the right time, so you don't compromise the rest of the structure. I needed to act at the right time, and the right time hadn't arrived yet. Over the following days, I kept monitoring the building cameras every night before sleeping. Adalberto came back the following Thursday. Same time, same briefcase, same dark suit. He stayed 2 hours and 40 minutes. He left with fewer papers than he brought in. She stayed another 20 minutes after he left. Then she went down, got her car, and drove off. I recorded everything, time, duration, frequency, not out of compulsion, out of method. A site without records is a site without control. And that, as much as it hurt, was a site. I was building something. I still didn't know the exact shape, but I knew the material I was gathering. It was early on a Wednesday morning that I realized what was missing. I had the document, I had the footage, I had his name, the amount, her signature, I had everything a lawyer would need to file a lawsuit, but I didn't have what I needed, which was her looking me in the eyes and understanding exactly what she'd done. Not for the judge, not for the paper. I was missing that. And it was that morning I started thinking about Valentine's Day in a completely different way than she was thinking. There's something I learned early in my career when I was still a site foreman and didn't have my own company or a name in the market. I learned from an older engineer, a man named Evaristo, who'd built half the buildings in the South Sector in the 80s and who spoke little, but when he spoke it was meant to be saved. Once, I had a serious problem in a foundation. A crack had appeared in the pile cap that wasn't foreseen in the project, and I didn't know if it was differential settlement or an execution problem. I went to him nervous, floor plan in hand, talking fast. He looked at me, took the plan, studied it for about 2 minutes in silence, and said, "Stop looking at the crack. The crack is a consequence. Go look for the cause." He folded the plan, gave it back to me, and walked away. I stood there holding the paper, but he was right. The crack was the visible symptom. The cause was somewhere else, buried, out of immediate sight. When I went to look for the real cause, I found that the solution was simpler than I'd imagined when I was panicking looking at the symptom. I thought of Evaristo that week when I decided to stop looking at the cameras and start looking at Tatiana, not at her images on the monitor, at the real her, the way I should have been looking from the start, without the filter of affection that blurs judgment. I started paying attention to the small things I'd let slide, to the pattern of her conversations, to the time she vanished from her phone, to the way she dodged certain topics, without seeming like she was dodging a highly developed skill she had, to change the subject with a question, to shift the focus of the conversation without you realizing you'd left the original point. I started taking notes, not in a notebook, not anywhere physical she could find. I took notes on my phone's note app in an untitled folder using construction language, dates, times, observations, site behavior. When a worker is hiding a mistake, he acts in a specific way, stays too close to the problem when you approach, speaks before you ask, offers an explanation before you request it. Tatiana had a similar pattern with the flat. Every time the topic got close to that address, she anticipated it, changed the subject with a lightness that only seems natural to someone who isn't paying attention. I was paying attention. On a Tuesday afternoon, she called me while I was in a site meeting. I didn't answer. When I finished the meeting, I saw she called 3 times in 20 minutes. I called back. She answered excited, said she'd closed a big sale, a 2-bedroom apartment in the East Sector, a good commission that she was going to celebrate with friends at night. I asked where. She said, at a bar in the Marista sector. I asked what time she'd finish. She said she didn't know. Depends on the mood. She told me not to wait up. I got home at 10 p.m. after solving a plumbing issue that had delayed the schedule. I went straight to the computer, opened the camera system. She'd arrived at the flat at 4:30 p.m. alone, left at 7:19 also alone. Adalberto hadn't shown up that day, but she'd stayed 2 hours and 49 minutes inside before going to celebrate with her friends. And when she left, she carried a briefcase that wasn't with her when she arrived. I went to sleep late, not out of restlessness, but out of a need to sit with that a little longer before drawing a conclusion. My dad used to say a rushed conclusion is like an uncured wall. It looks solid, but it can't bear the load. The next day, I called Dr. Enrique to the office. Not by phone, in person behind closed doors. I put the private agreement I'd gotten at the Board of Trade on the desk and explained everything from the beginning. He listened without interrupting, with that posture of an old-school lawyer who learned that interrupting a client mid-story makes you lose information. When I finished, he took the document, read it calmly, went back over 2 sections, placed it on the table. "You know what this constitutes, Murillo?" I said I knew. "Do you want to file now, or do you want to wait?" I said I wanted to wait, that before any filing I needed to understand the full scope of what she'd built, if there were more documents, if there were more investors, if there were more names using the company's tax ID. Enrique nodded. He said he'd call a trusted investigator, not a soap opera detective, but a professional specialized in gathering corporate and asset information, who worked with corporate law firms. A serious, discreet, expensive man. I said that wasn't a problem. 3 days later, the investigators sent me the report. It was 12 pages. I opened the file in the office late at night with the door locked. I read the 12 pages twice. On the second read, I marked the sections that needed confirmation and the ones that were fully confirmed. When I finished, I closed the laptop, went to the window, and stared at Goiânia for a while. The scheme was simpler than I'd imagined, and exactly because of that it was more annoying. Tatiana had built a narrative as a commercial rep for a premium development. She used my company's name, the track record of projects I delivered in the last few years, photos of my designs that were available on the company website. She put together a professional presentation, took it to the flat, sat with the investor, and sold shares in a development that was in the fundraising phase. Technical enough language to seem legit, vague enough not to be immediately verifiable. Adalberto wasn't the only one. There was one more name in the report, a businessman from Caldas Novas, and an owner who'd invested $17,000 in a similar agreement, drafted at a different notary 2 weeks before Adalberto's agreement. Same model, same structure, same fake development. Different amounts, but her same signature on both sheets. $93,000 in total, using the name I'd built over 18 years of work. I kept thinking about that number for a while, not because of the amount itself. I'd dealt with bigger amounts in land negotiations, in construction financing, in contract addendums. What weighed heavily was the surgical precision of the target. She hadn't used just any name. She'd used exactly the name that carried the most weight in that specific market, with that specific investor profile. An agribusinessman who wants to get into urban real estate goes after a construction company with a solid track record, delivered projects, a reputation built over time. She knew that. She knew because I'd explained it to her in a couple conversations about how investor fundraising works for a real estate launch. I taught her the weapon she used against me. That stuck with me in a way the other details didn't. I called the investigator and asked for one last check. I want to know if there was any other name besides those two, if there was identifiable bank movement, if there was a hidden partner in the scheme. He got back in 2 days, saying he didn't find a third investor and there was no apparent partner. The operation was hers, led by her, with her as the only identifiable beneficiary, alone. She'd done this completely alone. I can't say if that made things better or worse. On one hand, there was no one else to blame. There was no outside influence. There was no one who'd taken advantage of a weakness of hers. On the other hand, it removed any doubt about intention. When someone does something wrong under influence, you can separate the person from the act, find some explanation that isn't purely their character. When someone does it alone, with time, with a method, with no outside pressure, what you see is their actual character, without a filter, without mitigating circumstances, just who the person is. What I saw was I'd spent almost 2 years next to a woman I didn't know. That Friday, she came to sleep at my house, made that pasta she knew I liked, put on some country music softly, sat next to me on the couch with her head on my shoulder, watching a movie neither of us was really following. I stayed quiet, breathed slowly, let the moment be what it seemed to be, because I still needed time, because the right moment hadn't arrived yet, because I learned from Evaristo that you don't act on the symptom. You wait to understand the whole cause, build the diagnosis, and only then apply the solution. But while she slept, I was awake in the dark thinking about Valentine's Day. It was 18 days away, and I already knew exactly what I was going to put inside that envelope. There's a specific cruelty in continuing to be kind to someone after you found out what you found out. It's not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is when you pretend to be what you aren't out of vanity or convenience. What I was doing was different. It was containment. It was the difference between the worker who sees the crack and runs out screaming the building is going to fall, and the engineer who sees the crack, breathes, documents it, and starts working on the solution without alarming anyone prematurely. One destroys the site, the other solves the problem. I was solving the problem, but there's a cost to that no one talks about. There's a weight to sitting next to a person, drinking the breakfast coffee she prepared, replying her good afternoon text, and carrying in silence the weight of everything you know. And she doesn't know you know. It's not a weight that hurts sharply. It hurts in a dull, constant way, like that back pain that doesn't knock you down, but won't let you forget it's there. I carried that weight every day, and she didn't notice, which told me everything about the level of attention she actually gave me. It was on a Monday, 11 days before Valentine's Day, that I heard the conversation. The building's camera system had no audio. A standard CCTV camera doesn't pick up sound. And even if it picked up hallway audio, it wouldn't be admissible for anything. And I didn't even want that, but flat 308 was near the third-floor service intercom, that old wall device that older buildings still have installed, and that a Littleton had told me during the visit I made when I took over the property had a broken button, but the internal microphone worked. Old properties are like that. Something is always half working, and you learn to work with what you have. The intercom system was connected to the building's security hub, which in turn was accessible via the same login that gave me access to the cameras. I hadn't explored that part before because I had no reason to. That Monday, by chance, while reviewing the system's control panel, I saw the third-floor audio channel was active. The intercom mic was open. I put on my headphones. You could hear the hallway with reasonable quality. Footsteps, the sound of the elevator arriving, muffled conversations passing by the flat's door. And in that specific moment, I could hear Tatiana's voice clearly enough to understand every word. She was in the hallway before entering the room with the phone to her ear, the flat's door still closed. She hadn't noticed she was standing right next to the intercom. I didn't hear the voice on the other side, just hers. But what she said was more than enough. "Claudia, I swear to you this month is the month. 11 days, girl. 11 days, and I'm walking out of this flat with another life." Pause. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. You know Murillo, a construction man, construction mind. As long as there's a brick in front of him, he doesn't see anything else. Pause. Look at the place. I already picked it. That restaurant in Bueno I told you about. Table booked. Dress bought. Getting my nails done next week. All that's left is him kneeling. Pause. She laughed. Once I have his name, Claudia, this relying on commissions thing is over. Do you think I'm going to keep chasing clients with a tablet in hand, being Mrs. Resend? Imagine that. The name opens the door. I walk in. The rest is up to God. The sound of a key going into the lock. The flat door opening. The audio got more muffled when she walked in. I took off my headphones. I stood there looking at the computer screen for a while. The name opens the door. She didn't want me. She wanted a last name. She wanted what it represented in that specific market, in that specific city, where the name Resend already appeared on 3 delivered developments and 2 more underway. She wanted the business card I represented. She wanted the credential in Adalberto and the Caldas Novas businessman. And those $93,000 were the warm-up. It was her building her own capital before taking over the name's capital. She didn't plan on stopping the scheme after the wedding. She planned to scale it. I closed the system, went to the office kitchen, heated up some coffee that had been in the thermos since morning, drank it standing up. The coffee was bitter and cold in the middle, that bad way of coffee that sat too long. I drank it anyway. Sometimes you need something unpleasant to confirm you're awake and what you're living is real. That week, I watched her from afar, building the scenario she expected for that dinner. On Wednesday, she got her nails done. I saw it on the story she posted, photo of her hands with dark burgundy polish, caption, prep work. She didn't tag me. She posted it for her friends. On Thursday, she went to a store in Flamboyant. I knew because she sent me a photo of 2 dresses, asking which one I thought was prettier. I replied the one on the right, without even really looking, a dark wine one in fine fabric. She sent a heart and said that was exactly what she was thinking. She bought it. On Friday, she called excitedly, said she'd gotten a reservation at a restaurant that was impossible to book, that it'd be a night unlike any other, that she had a surprise for me too. I asked what surprise. She said if she told me, it wouldn't be a surprise. I said, all right, I love surprises. She laughed the way she laughed when she was pleased with herself. When I hung up, I grabbed my phone and called the same restaurant she'd booked. I confirmed the reservation under the name Resend. I added a special request for the table, a bottle of sparkling water, and a sealed envelope I'd hand personally to the maitre d' upon my arrival. The guy who answered said they'd gladly accommodate it. I hung up and went to the office drawer, where I keep documents that can't stay in a regular folder. I took out Adalberto's private agreement. I took out the copy of the Caldas Novas businessman's agreement the investigator had gotten. I put both on the table side by side. 2 sheets of paper representing almost $100,000 in the name of a company that hadn't authorized anything. in the name of a man who was at home thinking he was dating someone real while this was being built. I opened the computer and wrote an email to Dr. Enrique. Short and to the point. I needed him to draft the termination notice for the flat 308 lease with a move-out date in 30 days, signed by me as the property owner. And I needed a formal notification letter to Mr. Adalberto Quezada Nunez, informing him that the private agreement drafted in the construction company's name was null and void, without company authorization, without legal validity, and that the company made itself available for clarifications. I asked him to also prepare an equivalent document for the Caldas Novas businessman. Enrique replied in 20 minutes, saying he'd have everything ready in 48 hours. That Sunday, she invited me to lunch at her mom's house in the Jardim Goiás sector. Her mom was a lady named Nusa, a woman of few words and a heavy gaze. She had that specific manner of a mother who lost her financial status and never fully accepted it. The house was small, but carefully decorated. Every object in the right place. Iron tablecloth, good dishes save for Sunday. Lunch was chicken stew with rice and pasta the Goiás way, which doesn't apologize for the carbs. Dona Nusa treated me well, as always. She served me first, asked about the construction. She said she'd seen a report in the paper about the Goiânia real estate market and thought of me. I thanked her, ate, joined the conversation. Tatiana was glowing at that lunch, talkative, upbeat, running the table like someone celebrating something the others don't know yet. At one point when I went to the porch to get a chair and Tatiana went to the kitchen to help her mom, Dona Nusa passed me in the hallway and stopped. She looked at me for about 2 seconds and said quietly, without explanation, "You're a good man, Murilo." I hope she knows that. She didn't wait for an answer. She walked into the kitchen. I stood there in the hallway with the chair in my hand. I thought about Dona Nusa on the drive back. I thought about how many mothers know things about their kids they never say out loud, because maternal love has a loyalty that defies logic. And I wondered if she knew something specific, or if it was just that older woman's instinct that notices when the math isn't adding up but can't name the problem. I never found out the answer. When I got home that night, Dr. Enrique's envelope was waiting for me via email. I opened it, read the 3 documents carefully, reviewed every clause, and found a section I asked to adjust in Adalberto's letter. I wanted it to be absolutely clear that the company recognized no obligation stemming from the agreement, but that the amount he invested would be the subject of a reimbursement lawsuit against the person responsible, not against the construction company. I sent the revision to Enrique. He adjusted it and sent it back in 2 hours. I printed the documents in the office, put them in a folder, put the folder in the drawer only I open. It was 6 days until Valentine's Day. I still needed a keychain. I went to a hardware store the next day, one of those that sells everything. Screws, paint, locks, side accessories. I bought a simple metal keychain, no frills, no brand. The most basic kind on the shelf. The clerk asked if that was it. I said it was. He bagged it in a small plastic bag, rang it up, handed it to me with a receipt I didn't even need. I went back to the car, took the keychain out of the bag, held it in my hand for a moment. It was light, smaller than I expected. An insignificant piece of metal that wasn't even worth $1 and that in 6 days would weigh more than any diamond ring I could have put in my pocket. I kept it in my inner suit pocket next to the documents and went to work. On Thursday, before Valentine's Day, at 2:17 p.m., the landline in the construction company office rang. I was in a meeting with the engineer in charge of the Bueno site, discussing the 7th floor finishing schedule, when my assistant, Patricia, knocked on the door and opened it with that look of someone who doesn't want to interrupt, but has no choice. She said quietly there was a gentleman on the line asking for the head of the company, who'd called twice before, and she didn't know if she should transfer him. I excused myself to the engineer. I picked up the room's extension. "Hello." The voice on the other end was slow-paced, with that Goiás countryside accent that stretches the vowels and is in no rush at all. "Good afternoon. Am I speaking with Mr. Murilo Rezende?" I said yes. "Mr. Murilo, excuse the bother. My name is Adalberto Quezada Nunez. I'm from Rio Verde. I made an investment with a rep from your company about 4 months ago, and I'm calling because I wanted an update on the project's progress." The girl, Tatiana. She hasn't returned my messages for a few days, and I got a bit worried. The silence that followed was mine, not his. It lasted less than 2 seconds, but it weighed like a cinder block. Mr. Adalberto, I said with the calmest voice I could. I appreciate you reaching out. Can you give me the number of the document you signed? I need to locate it here in the system before giving any update to make sure I'm talking about the correct file. He gave it to me. I wrote it down on a piece of paper, even though I didn't need to. I knew exactly which document it was. I told him I'd check and call back by the end of the day. He thanked me with the politeness of a man raised before rushing became the norm. He said he didn't mean to bother, that he trusted the company's integrity, and hung up. I stood with the receiver in my hand for about 3 seconds after the line dropped. Patricia appeared at the door, asking if everything was okay. I said it was that she could keep holding the other calls, and I closed the door. The engineer looked at me without asking anything. He's known me for 6 years and learned that when I get that specific silence, the best thing to do is wait. I finished the meeting, sent the engineer off, stayed alone in the office. Adalberto was calling because Tatiana had stopped replying, which meant she knew the deadline was approaching. 6 months of the agreement, plans start construction, and she'd started pulling away before he pressed too hard. It was the classic move of someone managing a scheme that's reaching its limit. You become less available. You space out contact, you build distance to buy time, without giving a direct explanation. I'd seen that in construction. A supplier who doesn't deliver on time takes longer to answer the phone on the week it's due. She was taking the side exit, and the Valentine's Day dinner was her way out, not with me. After marrying into the Resend name, she probably intended to renegotiate the scheme from a different position. With the last name of an established construction company, she could extend the deadline, create a new narrative, convince Adalberto the project had a schedule adjustment. It was the kind of thing that works when you have credentials. Without the last name, she was exposed. With it, she had a shield. The wedding was the scheme's plan B. I called Dr. Enrique and told him about Adalberto's call. He stayed silent for a moment and said, "Murillo, this changes the timeline. If he starts pushing, he might approach the company formally sooner than you planned." I said I knew. He asked if I wanted to move anything up. I said no. The dinner was in 2 days, and I was going to do it the way I'd planned. He said he understood, but I needed to be aware I was managing a legal risk by holding the info for another 48 hours. I said I was aware. I hung up and went to the office window. Down there, the city continued with that indifferent normalcy Goiânia has. Rush hour traffic starting to jam on Avenue 85. The fine dust that kicks up when the wind hits the hot asphalt. The sky that intense late afternoon blue only the Cerrado has. Like the atmosphere had been squeezed until it got more concentrated. I grew up looking at that sky. I worked under it for over 20 years. There's an honesty in that blue. It hides nothing. There are no clouds to soften it. It's direct and open, and you see everything there is. That afternoon, looking at that sky, I confirmed to myself I was going to do what I'd planned the way I'd planned at the moment I planned. That night, Tatiana called at 7:30, excited, asking if I was home. She said she was coming over. She wanted to see me. I said she could come. She arrived 40 minutes later with a box of sweets a client had given her. She said the client had renovated their apartment and sent a gift. We ate the sweets, watching TV. Her head on my shoulder, the fan spinning because Goiânia's February heat shows no mercy even at dawn. At some point, she fell asleep next to me on the couch. I stayed awake another hour. I watched her sleep, her relaxed face, calm breathing. Hair in her face she didn't fix because she was really sleeping without an audience. It was the version of her I'd liked the most. That version without a script, without calculation, without the well-trained realtor smile. I thought for about 2 minutes if I'd gotten some part of my conclusion wrong, if there was any different interpretation for everything I'd seen, heard, and read. It was the kind of honest doubt anyone has when they're about to cross a point of no return. I prefer a man who has that doubt over one who doesn't. Because whoever has zero doubt when destroying someone's life has some character flaw that's no better than the person they're destroying. But the doubt lasted 2 minutes. After that, what remained was the document, my company's logo, her voice in the hallway, saying the name, opens the door, and Adalberto's voice on the phone, slow and polite, saying he was worried because she wasn't calling back. I woke her up gently at 11 p.m. I said it was late. She should go home and get a proper sleep. She got up sleepily, grabbed her purse, gave me a quick kiss. At the door, she turned and said with that smile she had when she was satisfied, "We won't see each other tomorrow, right? Let's save our energy for Saturday." I said, "All right." She said it was going to be an unforgettable night. I said it was. I closed the door, went straight to the office, opened the drawer, took out the folder with the documents, placed the flat's termination notice on the table, Adalberto's notification, the Call This Nova's businessman's notification, and the 2 fraudulent private agreements. I organized them in order, folded them carefully, put them inside the brown envelope with the construction company stamp, sealed it with glue, wrote nothing on the front. An envelope with no ID, no name, no address. I took the metal keychain from my suit pocket, put on top of the envelope. I kept looking at those 2 things on the table, an envelope and a keychain. Less than 100 grams of paper and metal. The weight of a 2-year relationship, of almost $100,000 in my company's name, of 18 years of built reputation, of a man from Rio Verde who'd called with a worried voice, asking where the money he'd trusted was. I put the keychain inside the envelope along with the documents. Sealed it again. Put in the folder. Put the folder in the leather briefcase I take to important meetings. The same one my dad gave me when I opened the company, worn on the edges with a latch that squeaks a bit, which I never replaced because it holds a memory inside that doesn't fit in a new briefcase. I went to sleep at 12:11 a.m. I slept well. That surprised me at the time and still surprises me when I think about it today. But there's one thing I learned from years in construction. When you have the complete diagnosis, when you know what you're doing and why, when the plan is set and every piece is in place, the body rests. It's uncertainty that takes sleep away. Clarity, oddly enough, gives a peace that isn't joy nor anesthesia. It's just firmness. It's knowing you'll show up the next day and do what needs to be done. One day left. I woke up at 6:10 without an alarm clock, like I wake up every construction Friday. The body has its own memory. 20 years on site train you to open your eyes before the alarm, as if the organism knew it has a structure to monitor, that things are happening that can't wait for you to finish sleeping. I lay there for about 3 minutes, looking at the ceiling. The fan spun. Outside, Goiania was already awake. The sound of the garbage truck on the next street. A dog barking 2 houses down. The dry noise of an iron gate someone opened and closed quickly. The day had arrived. I got up, went to the kitchen, made coffee in the cloth strainer I've used since I moved to this house. I never got used to paper filters. It takes something away from the flavor that I can't name, but my body notices. I drank the first cup standing at the sink, looking out the kitchen window at the small backyard that has a mango tree that was here before me and that I never had the heart to remove. In February, the mango tree is loaded. There are mangoes on the ground that fell on their own, green mangoes still on the branch, birds that show up early to enjoy it before the heat closes in. I thought of my dad right then. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because of the mango tree that reminded me of the Annapolis backyard where I grew up. My dad had a fig tree he watered every morning before heading to the site with an old water can he never swapped for a garden hose. I asked him once why he didn't use the hose hanging on the wall next to it. He said the can was more honest. You feel the weight of the water. You know exactly how much you're giving. With a hose you turn on and forget. My dad died without knowing I'd open a company. He died 2 months before the registration came out. I went to the notary alone to get the document and stood on the sidewalk with the paper in hand, thinking there were people who deserved to be in that moment and weren't. I keep that document in a separate folder from all the others. I never explained why to anyone. I finished the coffee, went to the home office, opened the computer, read the site emails that had arrived overnight, the foreman warning about an issue with the concrete pouring scheduled for Monday, a supplier confirming window frame delivery 2 days late. Patricia sending a summary of the week's pending items. I replied to all 3. I organized what could be solved by her and what needed my presence the following week. Then I closed the computer and called Dr. Enrique. He answered on the second ring. Said good morning before I spoke. I said good morning and asked if the documents were all in order. He said yes. He'd reviewed them the day before, that the notifications for Adalberto and the Caldas Novas businessman were ready to be sent as soon as I confirmed. I said I confirmed them to be sent Monday morning after the dinner. He said, understood. He asked if I was okay. I said I was, and it was true. I had that strange serenity of the eve of an important decision. That calm that isn't the absence of feeling, but feeling that's already been processed and is stored in the right place, without leaking where it shouldn't. Enrique said, Murillo, you know I've known you for 12 years. If you need anything tonight, anything at all, call me. I thanked him, hung up. At 10 in the morning, I went to the Marista building. I hadn't planned on going. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't part of any step I'd organized. But there are things you do not out of logic, but out of a need for closure, to close a cycle with physical presence, not just documents. I needed to go there one last time before dinner. I parked in the spot marked owner, my spot a Littleton had designated when I took over the property. I walked through the lobby, greeted the doorman, took the elevator up to the 3rd floor, walked down the hallway slowly, door 301, 302, 304, 306. I stopped in front of 308. The room's plaque was still there. Her name, Tatiana Vaz, real estate consultant, with a phone and email in small letters below. A discreet acrylic plaque, the kind that costs $8 and anyone gets made at a quick print shop. I stared at the plaque for about 30 seconds. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness either. At least not the sadness I expected to feel. What I felt was something more like exhaustion, a specific exhaustion that isn't of the body, but of belief. The exhaustion of having believed in a version of a person that didn't exist, of having built affection on a foundation that was rotten from the start, of having spent years investing in a development that was already condemned before it began. I'd built buildings with bad foundations before, not out of negligence, but out of incorrect soil testing info, which is a real risk in the business. You spot the problem, halt, redo the project, take the loss, learn what you hadn't learned before, move on. It's not the end of anything. It's the cost of operating in an uncontrolled market. That was the cost of operating in a relationship I hadn't properly investigated. I went down to the ground floor, thanked the doorman, left. I went straight to Flamboyant Mall to pick up something I'd left for the last minute. I needed a suit jacket. I'm not in the habit of wearing jackets daily, but that night called for it, not out of vanity, out of respect for the moment. Were you going to deliver a sentence? You present yourself properly. It's a matter of seriousness, of honoring the weight of what you're doing. I walked into a store, told the salesman what I needed. I politely refused 3 options. I accepted the 4th. A dark navy blue, straight cut, no frills. I tried it on, it fit. I paid in cash, which is how I pay for things I don't want on my statement as a date record. I got back home at 2 p.m. I ate what there was for lunch, rice, beans, a piece of meat that had been in the fridge since the day before, heated on the stove, eaten at the kitchen table with the fan on, and the silence of the house I learned to like after years living alone. That silence always felt honest to me. It doesn't pretend to be something else. At 3:30, I want to take a shower. I got dressed carefully. Dark pants, white button-down shirt, new jacket, leather shoes I shined before putting away the last time I used them. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a second, not with vanity, just to confirm the person I was seeing was whole, was standing, was ready. I grabbed my dad's leather briefcase, opened it, took out the folder with the documents, removed the brown envelope. I opened the envelope, checked it one last time. Termination notice, the 2 notifications, the 2 fraudulent private agreements with the sections highlighted in yellow. Everything in order, folded carefully in the right sequence. At the bottom of the envelope, the metal keychain. I sealed it, kept it in my new jacket's inner pocket. The weight was almost 0. A paper envelope and a piece of metal. But I felt it there. The same way you feel the weight of a pen when you're about to sign an important contract. It's not the physical weight you feel. It's the weight of what the object represents, of what will change when you use it the way you planned. I left home at 6:40. The Friday Valentine's Day traffic in Goiânia was exactly what I expected. Slow, congested, full of nice cars with dressed-up people going to fancy places. I put on some old country music on the radio, the kind my dad used to listen to. Not the college pop country with an electronic beat that plays everywhere, but the one with a raspy voice and real guitar. The kind that talks about loss and longing with an honesty the new version lost. Driving slowly in traffic, with that music, I thought there were days that feel bigger than others. Not because more things happen, sometimes less happens, but because what happens holds more weight, more consequence, more permanence. That was one of those days. I arrived at the restaurant at 7:20. The reservation was for 8. I asked to go in anyway. I said I wanted to sit down earlier. The maitre d', a guy named Raphael, who I'd spoken on the phone, recognized me by name, led me to the table, discreet and efficient. I handed him the envelope personally, as I'd requested, and said that when dessert arrived at the table next to us, he didn't need to do anything. I was going to handle it myself. He nodded with that professionalism of someone who works in a good place and learned that a discreet client deserves discretion in return. I sat down, ordered sparkling water, looked at the dining room, tables with flowers, dim lighting, couples arriving little by little, that low, warm hum of a full restaurant, which is one of the most human sounds that exist. Outside through the glass, the Bueno sector on a Friday night, the movement of the city that never stops. At 8:03, she walked in. Wine-colored dress, hair tied back, the perfume I recognized from afar, beautiful, like I said at the beginning, like I always said. She smiled when she saw me, a smile I knew well, that I'd learned to read in layers. On top, genuine affection or something resembling it. Underneath, satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone reaching the point they plan to reach. She walked across the room towards me. I stood up, pulled her chair out, waited for her to sit. I sat on the other side. She looked around with that gaze of someone approving the place they chose. She said it was beautiful. She said I looked handsome in the jacket. She grabbed my hand across the table and said with a voice she'd calibrated for that moment, "It's so good we're here. Murillo, we deserve this." I agreed, called the waiter, asked for the menu. The night began. Dinner lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. She ordered a starter, main course, and wine without looking at the price, like someone used to being supported by the expectation of what comes next. I ordered steak, water, and only kept the wine for appearances. I filled the glass twice and emptied neither. I needed to be whole that night. I needed every millimeter of attention I had. The conversation was led by her, as always. She talked about a sale she'd almost closed, a difficult client she'd won over, a friend who'd separated and was in a pathetic state. I listened, replied at the right time. I asked the right questions at the right moments. I learned from years of negotiation that the person on the other side of the table reveals much more about themselves when they believe they're in control of the conversation. You let them talk, you listen with real attention, and start piecing things together. She was glowing. That's the detail I can't get out of my memory when I think about that night. How much she was glowing, not in a nervous way, not like someone faking it well, in a genuine way of someone who's exactly where they wanted to be, reaping what they sowed, reaching the destination of a trip she'd planned carefully, the satisfaction of someone who believes they won. In the middle of dinner, she raised her glass and proposed a toast. She said she wanted a toast to new beginnings, to doors opening, to the people we meet along the way who change everything. She looked me in the eyes when she said that. I raised my glass, touched hers with that fine, crystal sound. Did I drink? She drank, smiled. I smiled back. When the plates were cleared and the waiter asked about dessert, she said she wanted the chocolate fondant. She'd seen it on the menu and commented on it twice during dinner. I ordered coffee. The waiter left. She stared at me with that smile of someone who's waiting. The silence lasted 5 seconds. 5 seconds she interpreted as a dramatic pause from a man gathering courage. It wasn't a lack of courage. It was the right moment arriving. I reached into my inner suit pocket. I saw her eyes light up. I saw her breathing change slightly, that restraint of someone trying not to show what they're feeling and not fully succeeding. She slightly straightened her body in the chair, like someone getting ready, like someone about to be photographed, wanting to be at the right angle. I took the envelope out of my pocket, placed it on the table. She looked at the envelope with a fraction of a second of hesitation. It wasn't what she expected to see. She expected a little box, expected velvet, expected the universal shape of something everyone recognizes from afar. The brown envelope with the company stamp wasn't that, but she adjusted quickly, reorganized her interpretation in real time, and decided it was a creative man doing it differently. She reached out carefully, like someone holding on to the moment, like someone who doesn't want it to pass too quickly. She opened the envelope flap, pulled out the folded papers, opened the first one, read the first line, and it was right there on that first line that her smile started to fade. Not all at once, little by little, like I already described, like a lowering tide, revealing what was hidden underneath. She moved to the second line, to the third. I watched her read without saying a word, without helping, without explaining. I let the document speak for itself, which is what a well-written document does when you let it. It was the lease termination notice for Flat 308 in the commercial building located in the Marista sector, signed by Murilo Enrique Resende, acting as the property owner. With a move-out date in 30 days, she raised her eyes from the paper and looked at me. I still didn't say anything. I indicated with a slight gesture that there was more inside the envelope. She looked back at the envelope, pulled out the second document with a slowness that wasn't carefulness. It was the movement of someone delaying the inevitable, who knows what comes next will be worse, and is using every second they have before seeing it. She opened it, read it, and this time her face went beyond losing its smile. It turned white in a way makeup couldn't hide, that paleness that comes from within and no cosmetic prep can hold back. It was the fraudulent private agreement with Adalberto's name, with my company's logo, with her signature, with the sections highlighted in yellow. Stapled underneath, the Caldas Nova's businessman's agreement, 2 documents, 2 names, $93,000. Everything she'd built in those 4 months inside the flat, which I owned without her knowing. The silence at the table lasted as long as she needed to understand the scope of what she was holding in her hands. After that, I placed the keychain on the table. Her hands started shaking. It wasn't words that came out her first. It was a small, almost imperceptible sound that wasn't crying or speaking. It was the sound of someone taking a real hit and their body reacting before their mind organizes a response. She looked at the keychain, looked at me, looked back at the keychain. I spoke slowly with the voice I use when I'm closing a negotiation. Tatiana, I bought the Marista building 2 months ago. I've had access to the CCTV cameras since day one. I saw Adalberto walking in and out of the flat 8 times. I saw the documents you exchanged. I saw you leave with the briefcase. I saw everything. She opened her mouth, closed it. Dr. Enrique has already prepped the notifications for Adalberto and the gentleman from Caldas Novas, stating the agreement is void, that the company didn't authorize anything, and that they should sue you personally for the refund. That's going in the mail on Monday morning. Her jaw moved, no words came out. The keys on the table are for the flat. You've got 30 days to move out, as stated in the notice. You can keep them. She stared at the keychain for a long time. When she raised her eyes to me, there was something inside them I recognized. It wasn't remorse, at least not entirely. It was calculation. Even there, even at that moment, her processing was survival, figuring out how much room she still had, what the possible way out was. She said with whatever voice she had left, Murilo, let me explain. I said, no need. I said it without anger. I said it with the calm of someone who already processed everything there was to process, and has no energy left to waste on an explanation that won't change any facts. The facts were on the table, folded on paper, with a notary stamp and a verified signature. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, took dinner money out of my wallet, counted on the table, in bills, left it under the napkin holder, not out of calculated coldness, not to make a scene, but because it's the way I always pay restaurant bills, and I wasn't going to change my ways because of that moment. I grabbed my briefcase, looked at her one last time. She was sitting with the papers in her hand and the keychain on the table, with the chocolate fondant the waiter had brought during that untouched silence on the side, with the wine she'd ordered still half full in the glass. With the wine dress she'd bought thinking of a different outcome and that she'd have to wear leaving anyway, just heading to another destination. I didn't say anything else. I crossed the room, greeted Raphael with a nod. walked out the glass door. Outside, the Goianian night, on Valentine's Day, was in full swing. Couples on the sidewalk, a car honking in the distance, the heat that hadn't left with the sun, the dark sky with no stars visible because of the city lights. I walked to my Hilux, opened the door, sat down. I sat still for about 2 minutes without starting the car. It wasn't relief I felt, it wasn't euphoria, it wasn't victory in the sense that word usually has. It was something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of someone who did what needed to be done the way it needed to be done, without exaggeration, without unnecessary cruelty, without losing what was his in the process. I'd walked into that dinner hole. I left whole, I started the car, put the old country music back on, pulled out slowly through the traffic that was starting to melt away with the end of the night. I took Avenue 85 towards home. I drove past the city I'd helped build brick by brick, building by building, decision by decision. I got home, took off my jacket, hung it on a chair, went to the kitchen, warmed up leftovers in the fridge, ate standing at the sink, looking at the dark backyard, where the mango tree stood still in the heat of the night. I washed the plate, turned off the light, went to sleep, and slept like a man who owes nothing to anyone.